Well, thanks everyone for joining us this morning. First of all, I'd like to start by extending a warm welcome back to students who are returning to school this week. I know it's been a long 6 months without the familiarities of classrooms or their classmates, so I wish them all the success in a great school year that's going to be coming up. To all the administrators, teachers, staff who have worked so hard to prepare for this day, my heartfelt thank you. Your efforts have not gone unnoticed, and you will have all stepped up to learn new protocols and processes and prepare your classrooms and your teachings to accommodate this exceptional time. There's been a lot of work done by everyone to ensure our schools are as safe as possible, and I again want to extend my personal thank you to everyone that's been engaged. So today, we're announcing $51 million in approved funding to continue that work, of which $41 million is new funding. Through 46 applications, school divisions, along with eligible qualified independent schools and historical high schools, will receive funding from the Education COVID Emergency Fund. This funding is in recognition of one-time emergent funding requirements for COVID-associated costs. Across the province, combined with the $10 million in the remaining school savings, this means a significant investment in the following priority areas. There's $19.1 million available for sanitation, which includes 190 new staff. There's $6 million available for equipment and furniture. There's $13.2 million available for supports for immunocompromised students, including new 150 teachers and staff. There's $9.5 million for additional distance learning capacity, including 102 new teachers and staff, and there's $4 million available for technology upgrades. As a result of this funding, a total of 443 custodial support teachers and staff are expected to be hired. This is in addition to the more than 200 staff projected to be hired as a result of the increased funding in the 2020-2021 budget. As a result of our combined funding increases, more than 600 new teachers and staff will be funded this school year. This significant investment will ensure that our school divisions have the resources that they need to respond and plan for emergent items. In addition to this funding increase, today we're also announcing stability for school division funding. Typically, operating funding for school division is confirmed after enrollments are submitted on September 30th. In recognition of the exceptional circumstances this year, the Ministry of Education is delaying any consideration for the redistribution of grants once actual enrollments are known in January. This enrollment date change will provide school divisions stability regardless of actual enrollments this fall, while minimizing any potential impact on redistribution of division operating funds due to decreases in enrollment. Following today's approval of applications, there is $64 million remaining in the COVID Contingency Fund for Education. The next intake for school division funding applications will be on December 1st. So I'll now take any questions that you have.
We'll take our first question from the room. Arthur?
Do you know how long it's going to take until these 443 teachers and staff are actually hired and in the classrooms?
Well, that will be up to the school division, certainly getting the information today in terms of how much funding is being made available to school divisions. School divisions will be able to embark on that process. We will be certainly consulting with school divisions as we go to make sure that those positions are being filled with the funds that are being provided. So that will be an ongoing conversation that we're going to be having with school divisions, but we expect them to start that process today.
Wouldn't it have been advantageous from a safety perspective if school divisions feel that these staff are needed to have them in place for the first day of school?
Well, we know that a number of school divisions have already taken some steps to engage additional staff, not just with respect to sanitation, but with respect to providing distance learning. So a lot of school divisions have already been taking those steps. This additional funding will be able to provide the additional security that school divisions need from those perspectives. So certainly school divisions have already taken steps to fill a lot of the needs that they've had in their divisions to ensure a safe return to school.
Steph?
Minister, there was a lot of teachers that were upset, that were angry about the way the government handled the back-to-school approach. Now that classes are here, I guess everyone's going to wait to see kind of what actually happens. Do you think the government has any repairing of relationships to do with teachers, just given how the back-to-school plan kind of shook out over this past month?
Well, there's always, with anything, building relationships with your stakeholders is always very important. I was very pleased that we had the cooperation of the STF at the response planning team table. They were very helpful in terms of ensuring not only the safe return to school, but the review of the plans that were submitted. So certainly there's always relationships to work on in any scenario. I know that there's a lot of teachers who are quite happy to be back in school today, a lot that are happy with the plans at school divisions, but I think the fact that the plans that have been prepared and the plans that have been approved by public health and by the RPT, I think is indicative of a good working relationship between teachers. There will always be some concern. We've always expressed our concern in terms of ensuring that teachers and students return to school safely. I think we've accomplished that with our plan, certainly a flexible plan, one that will continue to evolve as the school year opens. But continuing to build relationships, continuing to enhance the relationships with all our partners in education continues to be a priority of mine as the Minister of Education.
Follow-up, Steph?
Yeah, do you think that outbreaks in schools are going to be inevitable as students are now just back in classrooms?
Well, I think, what we're encouraging people to do is to continue to follow the very good advice of the Chief Medical Health Officer and local public health. I think that we've seen an incident over the weekend or late Friday where there was a teacher who tested positive. I think that that's perhaps not uninevitable, but certainly we have processes and procedures in place to ensure the safety of our staff and our students should that occur. And certainly the ongoing conversations that we're having with public health, I mentioned some time ago that there are ongoing weekly conversations between local public health and school divisions and school boards to ensure that we have the best protocols in place to ensure the safety of everyone that's attending our schools. But continuing to follow the advice of the Chief Medical Health Officer around hand cleaning and social distancing will continue to be very important, not just in schools, but in the community, of course.
We'll take a question from the phone line.
We have Adam Hunter with CBC.
Hi, Minister. I'm wondering if you think some of this funding and the planning could have been announced earlier. I know it's hindsight, but a few schools and school divisions, were having to do things last minute. You had to delay the school year by a week. Could this have been announced earlier and maybe cause less stress for teachers and school divisions and parents?
Well, as I've mentioned before, certainly the plans that have been put together by school divisions we think are very good plans. School divisions were already making some plans for additional expenditures around PPE and sanitation. So the fact that the federal government had just announced the additional $75 million in funding quite late enabled us to be able to utilize those funds in the process that we had put in place for applications. And so we wanted to make sure that those funds were available as quickly as possible. So I think school divisions have done a remarkable job in preparing for back to school to ensure students and teachers are safe. This additional funding will certainly enhance their ability in a number of areas. And so we're quite pleased to see the investment that the federal government has made.
Follow-up, Adam?
How soon will schools notice changes with this new funding? Will we see, teachers there next week or custodial staff? Will there be noticeable changes, or do you expect this to take a month or two or a few weeks?
Well, I would expect school divisions who are anticipating, once they made their applications the week before last, would likely be anticipating that they would be receiving some additional funds, although they wouldn't have known how much additional funding was being provided until today. But I believe that there's a number of school divisions, at least the ones that I have talked to, that were already making some plans to ensure that they had staff or additional staff in place. Now that these funds have been confirmed, they'll be able to firm up a lot of those plans.
We'll go to the room. Allison?
There's mask exemption forms that have been floating around on a Facebook group, No Masks Saskatchewan. These ones in particular are for Regina Public School. And there seems to be a lot of parents asking how they get these. I'm just wondering if there are any concerns with parents who are against masks trying to abuse this type of system and get their kids out of wearing masks when indeed there would actually be no medical condition that would allow them to not wear a mask?
Well, that would be some concern. Certainly, we want to ensure that all students and teachers are safe in their schools, and that teachers and students in particular follow the policies that have been put in place by local school divisions. Certainly, there are some exemptions that are available in certain very limited circumstances, but we would expect that parents would respect the decisions and the protocols that have been put in place by local school divisions. You know, masks end up protecting everyone in the school, and so to the extent that exemptions may well be granted, they need to be in exceptional circumstances.
Follow-up, Allison?
In regards to the Indian Head School having to go to online for the next week or so, will any of this funding help with, you know, maybe that drop of the hat turnover going towards online schooling for a week or two if a school were to have to close down, like in the case of Indian Head?
Well, as I mentioned, there's a significant amount of funding that's being announced today for enhancing online learning. We know that that particular school will be moving to online learning. There's 2 days to kind of adjust for that, and so there'll be a week of online learning. We're aware that the school division is preparing for that so that students will be able to be accommodated through that process. My officials in the Ministry of Education will continue to monitor that situation to make sure that the proper educational opportunities are provided to those children in that immediate period of time. But I don't have any immediate concerns in respect of that school division's ability to provide online learning now to those children.
Steph?
How many of the 6 million masks that the ministry ordered are here, and how many have actually been distributed to the school divisions?
You know, I'll get back to you with how many. We've distributed quite a number of them. I don't have the exact number, Steph, but I'll get back to you with that shortly after the news conference. We spent $2.3 million on masks so far, the majority of which have been received and I believe have been distributed now. The balance of those masks will be ordered as we need them. There's an inventory currently being done with school divisions to see what their additional needs are. A number of school divisions have already purchased masks and shields using their own resources. So that was one of the processes that we wanted to go through today and for the balance of the week to see what their inventories are and what their requirements will be, so that if there's additional resources, additional masks and shields that need to be ordered, they will be ordered immediately.
Follow-up?
Yeah, you know, so much of this is being left in the hands of school division, which I know your government says they're the best suited to kind of handle the granular parts of the safety plans, but what kind of oversight is the Ministry of Education providing to make sure that plans are being followed and that, you know, exemptions are only being granted when actually needed to be, when they don't seem to necessarily be in the driver's seat of some of these kind of day-to-day decisions being made?
Well, there's general oversight by the Ministry of Education. My deputy minister is in very frequent contact with the directors of education of school divisions to make sure that those plans are being followed. Certainly, as I mentioned before, there's an ongoing conversation on a weekly basis with local public health to make sure that any challenges that are seen in school divisions are dealt with as quickly as possible. So there is a significant amount of oversight by the Ministry of Education and to ensure that the plans are being complied with. We'll continue to monitor those plans because they're, as I mentioned before, the local delivery of those plans is very important to ensure a safe school opening. So without oversight, you know, we don't want to lose sight of the effectiveness of those plans. And so there is some significant oversight by the Ministry of Education.
Arthur?
Of the $41 million that's marked as provincial funding, how much of that is actually rerouted federal funding?
Well, we kind of prefer to refer to this as kind of a pool of funding, this $155 million that we had for back to school. So we haven't received any federal money yet. Those funds are, as I understand, going to be distributed shortly, but we haven't received any of that yet. But we do want to make sure that school divisions are aware of what the commitments that the province is prepared to make, both with respect to provincial funding and federal funding, so that they can prepare and continue to work to prepare to ensure a safe return to school. So that's where the funds are coming from, in addition to the $10 million, which is being directed by school divisions for the balance of the savings that they've had as a result of the suspension of in-class learning.
Follow-up, Arthur?
So just to be clear, all of that 41 million is, you know, originally from the provincial contingency that was then put into the school contingency?
Well, as I've said, we kind of prefer to refer to this as kind of a pool of funds. We'll be doing, as I mentioned, another intake at the beginning of December to continue to support school divisions in their safety plans at schools. So we want to make sure that school divisions are aware of what's available to them, and that's why we've announced that $41 million in additional support today.
We'll take another question on the phone line.
We have Roberta Bell with Global.
Hi, my question is wanting to clarify the 600 new teachers that there's, or staff members that there's funding for. Is there any idea where these people, some of who could require higher levels of education, might come from on such short notice?
Well, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, there's about 443 people that will be retained as a result of the additional funding that's being provided today. There was just over 200 additional staff that were being retained as a result of increases in the budget that was announced by the Minister of Finance earlier on in the year. School divisions will need to be working with their local associations, with the STF, with other providers to make sure that they have the staff in place. So we'll be continuing to monitor that with school divisions to make sure that they're getting the people in place that they need to get in place for to support the funding that's been provided. So as I say, the school divisions will be responsible for this, but we'll continue to keep an eye on that to make sure that those people are retained.
You have a follow-up, Roberta?
Yes, and regarding the actual space in which they could be teaching, a lot of the concern was, having kids not clustered so crowdedly in a classroom. Is there space if we're, making smaller classes and having a new teacher or a different teacher lead them? Is there actually physical room in our schools?
Well, that's some of the challenges, of course, in some of the schools that we have. I think the safety protocols have been put in place with local plans, respect that. Issues around social distancing, issues around mask wearing, I think will accommodate that, and that's certainly comments that have been provided to us and supported by the Chief Medical Health Officer. So to the extent that school divisions are going to be looking at those kinds of things, certainly there was some requests that were made for additional furniture and supplies to accommodate front-facing, those kinds of things. So school divisions have put forward what they consider to be their priorities in terms of ensuring a safe return to school. And as I mentioned earlier, we've gone through those plans, we've gone through those requests and prioritized them to make sure that to the greatest extent possible, those funds are being used in the most effective way to ensure that safe return to school.
Arthur?
I just want to be clear, because it says that these teachers are to support distance learning capacity and to support certain students that might have health problems. None of these teachers are actually going to be dedicated towards reducing class sizes, correct?
Well, that'll be up to the school divisions to determine that. Certainly, there will be a number of students in the province that are going to be taking advantage of distance learning. That will have some effect on class sizes in some areas. But certainly our priority with respect to this funding was around sanitation, and it was with respect to immunocompromised children and making sure that the school divisions had the resources to continue to provide that, to enhance online learning for those children and other children that want to take online learning.
How does the 41 million compare to what the school divisions actually asked for? Do you have a number of the total value of applications? And if it's more than 41 million, why did you?
Well, there was 46 applications that totaled about $80 million in requests. And so as I mentioned, what we've done is we've gone through those applications in conjunction with the school divisions to prioritize what we consider to be the priorities for a safe return to school. So as I've said, sanitation was a priority, making sure that we deal with immunocompromised children, distance learning was a priority. There were a number of things which, in consultation with the school division, we didn't consider to be a priority. So for instance, a number of school divisions, a significant amount of that difference was around substitute teacher costs. School divisions have budgets for substitute teachers, and we really don't know at the present time what the demand will be on school divisions for substitute teachers. And so we'll continue to assess that as we go forward. As I said, there's 2 more intakes, or at least an intake in December with respect to additional funds out of the total pool, so we'll reassess that at the time. But that was something that we didn't consider to be an immediate priority for funding for school divisions because we really didn't know what those numbers would be, and certainly school divisions have existing budgets for sub-costs. Other things like yoga mats, pencil cases, fanny packs, things like that we didn't consider to be a priority. And so we looked at what the priorities would be for ensuring an immediate safe return to school, and that's where our priorities were for the initial funding. So while there was a request for $80 million, certainly there was what we've identified, I think, in what we've announced today is where I think priorities are, not just for the Ministry of Education, but for school divisions.
Steph?
Yeah, what is the Ministry of Education's directive when it comes to school divisions in schools, say having sports, any kind of extracurricular activities, you know, trips to museums, like all of these kind of regular outside of classroom learning things, and what direction, if any, has the Ministry of Education provided?
Well, a number of school divisions, as you know, have made some decisions around extracurricular activities, and I know the STF has made some recommendations to their members around the delivery of extracurricular activities. The position of the government and the Ministry of Education is that if extracurricular activities can be delivered in a way that's consistent with the guidelines from public health, then that would be fine. But we are not going to dictate to the school divisions that they should provide extracurricular activities. Those were decisions that were made by school divisions and given the suggestions that have been made by the STF to their members. But the position of the government is that if extracurricular activities can be delivered consistent with guidelines from public health, then that's our position. But again, school divisions have local autonomy to be able to make those decisions, and a number of them have.
Follow up, Steph?
Yeah, in saying you don't know what the demand is going to be on substitute teachers, it seems like on a common sense level of thinking, like if there's going to be more vigilance around you have a cold or you have a cough or you have a runny nose, you stay home, or maybe before parents and teachers and students kind of push that a little bit, wouldn't the common sense method of thinking be that we anticipate some kind of more demand on substitute teachers, because the minute a teacher maybe gets a bit of a headache or gets a runny nose, they're going to opt to stay home just out of pure kind of safety precaution?
Well, and that's what we want. I mean, we want to make sure that everyone is in the school that's safe in the schools, teachers and students. So we do anticipate that there will be a demand on substitute teachers, an increased demand over what likely is in the budgets of school divisions. But we don't know what that number is going to be. And as I've said, our priority now is to make sure that we have a safe return to school in the immediate time. So we'll be continuing to assess this. One of the good things about our back-to-school plan and the funding protocols that we have in place is that there is additional funds available, and we will be assessing any additional needs of school divisions as we go. Substitute teachers may well be one of those things, and as I've said, there's another intake at the beginning of December, so that we'll be able to assess whether or not additional funding is required for school divisions to support them in that.
You've chosen to delay the time for recalculating the grants, as you said, from September 30th to January. What would then happen in January? Could that result in a retroactive clawback of school divisions that had lower enrollment?
Well, we're going to be working through that with school divisions. Certainly, the budget's the budget, and this happens at the end of September every year, where there's some school divisions which may have an increase in enrollment, some that may have a decrease in enrollment, and so there's a redistribution of the funds that are available in the budget. We're currently working through that scenario to determine what the impact will be on school divisions, and we really won't know that for a while, because there will be a lot of parents who decide to keep their kids home, and perhaps after the end of September, send them back to school, from whether they're homeschooling, for instance. And so we really won't know what the impact is, but our plan and our desire as Ministry of Education and as government is to have as minimal impact on school division funding as possible. But again, this is a process that takes place every year when it comes to redistribution of the grant in terms of the enrollment numbers. And so we'll be working quite closely with school divisions to make sure that that they're not adversely affected. Because you're right, I mean, at the end of September, it's a different calculation than it is in early January. And so we'll be looking very carefully at school divisions to make sure that they're not adversely affected.
But could it still result in, school divisions losing money that had already been committed to them for the 2020-2021 school year?
Well, that's what happens every year. I mean, there's certain commitments that are made to school divisions based on their projected enrollments, which we get earlier on in the year, and so those adjustments are always made after the September 30th. So we'll be making those adjustments later on in the year, recognizing the fact that this is an exceptional year. But as I mentioned, we want to make sure that the impact on school divisions is as minimal as possible, because a lot of those school divisions will have used some of those resources already.
I think that concludes our time for today. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone.